It's pretty common that our Vue applications make API calls. And when they do, it's a best practice to let our users know that something is loading, especially if it might take a little while to return from the API call. Then once it returns, we display the template onto the page. The simplest way to implement this is with a simple if and else. As our application grows, it's not uncommon to have one component that makes an API call and then another component somewhere else that makes an API call. And we might want to have a loading component up here at this parent component and not display the component until both API calls have been returned. Here at Vue Mastery, we've shown how to solve this problem using Vuex because we can have a global state with loading status. However, in Vue 3, there's a new feature which provides an even better solution. This is the Suspense component. To use it, we simply put it inside of a template. We don't have to import it. Our component already has access. Then we specify a default template. This is where we put components, one or more of which has a setup method that returns a promise or an asynchronous component. Then we specify a fallback template. This is what to display when we're loading. Let's build out a simple example. Here we'll put our event component. We've used this in previous lessons. Then we'll simply display loading while this is loading. Inside of our script tag, we'll simply include this event component. And let's take a look inside that file right now. What's inside here? It might look something like this. And we're using the event space composable, which we used in a previous lesson. Don't worry, you don't have to know this event composable to understand what's going on. I want you to notice that this component has asynchronous, or just async before it's set up, and functions that use async also need to use await. Our use event space composable is making that API call. And we don't need a composable to call Suspense. This could easily be a service library that does API calls for us, or we could just be doing the API call right here. So if we load this up in the browser, we can see that our fallback template showing loading gets loaded first, and then when the promise resolves, it displays the default template. Suspense waits for all the asynchronous calls to be resolved before displaying the default template. We can test this out simply by using the event component twice. So if we load up our browser, we see loading, and then only once both API calls are returned does it display the default template. The killer feature of Suspense is that we can have deeply nested API calls, and it's going to wait until they're all resolved. That's pretty cool, but when we're dealing with API calls, we also have to make sure to implement error handling. And how do we do that with Suspense? Here's our previous code, and let's add some error handling. First, we'll import ref, and we'll need to use the onErrorCaptured lifecycle hook. Then inside our setup method, we'll declare a reactive reference called error. Then we'll use the onErrorCaptured lifecycle hook to listen for errors, and if they happen, it'll set the error and then return true. Return true simply prevents the error from propagating and then appearing in our user's browser. Then in the template, we'll check to see if we have an error. If so, let's display it. And then we put the velse as an attribute on the Suspense component. If we look in our browser and we get a network error, it gets displayed as we would expect. I'm definitely looking forward to using Suspense in my Vue 3 applications. And one user interface best practice we can use with it are skeleton loading screens. So rather than having a spinner, we can do what you see here on the right. These skeleton loading screens are getting more and more common all around the internet. And in the lesson resources, I'll link to a few articles that show you how to put them together. Thanks for watching.